You're listening to Science and Saucery, a show dedicated to adding life to your years. And now your hosts, registered dietitian Juliana Hever and scientist Ray Cronice.
Welcome.
Hello, hello.
We get to have an interview today. Those are a lot of fun.
Yes. And not only is this an interview, this is an interview about things that people are very interested in. We get so many questions and people are so curious about metabolism.
Right.
And we bring in on an expert.
And it's going to be fun today talking with Kevin Jessop. I've known Kevin for, almost a decade at this point, actually, since maybe 7 years, 8 years. But Kevin is the guy who set up my metabolic lab. And so he works for a company called COSMED, which is a leader in metabolic equipment. And he gets his background from the exercise physiology perspective. When we talk to him in a minute, we can get him to talk a little bit about this. And it's going to be a different kind of interview because it's really kind of a discussion among friends. I think all three of us have a lot to add in this subject. But what's really neat about Kevin is that during the time when we were doing the research for oxidative priority, he got headhunted by Apple. And so he ended up going to Apple for this super secret project. And hopefully he can talk about it a little bit. But he went to Apple and then after that went back to COSMED, and that's where he is today. So anyway, we're going to be talking to him today.
We're going to get a little sciencey, which
Gonna
is
get a little
fun. We
geeky.
love to do that.
So today we have Kevin. Welcome, Kevin.
Glad to be here.
It's really good to have you on. We've been friends for a long time, and of course, Juliana.
Yes, I'm so excited. Thank you so much for joining us, Kevin.
No, it's definitely a great pleasure.
Yeah, so I want to set this up for everybody listening as a little bit of background, and then I sort of integrate my story, Juliana's story, and Kevin's story all together, and then I think we can just explore metabolism, which will be a lot of fun. Today's going to be probably a more geeky show than we're normally doing because we all love this and we want to get into the details a little bit. But let me just start with the backdrop. Kevin, if you could just give a quick overview of really your backgrounds, your school, and then just moving forward up until, COSMED when we meet, and then Apple and where you are now, just to give everybody a framework for what you do every day.
Okay. So I started off and I had a passion for medicine and everything as a kid because early on in my life, I was going through physical therapy, et cetera. And later on, it morphed because I was an athlete into exercise science. So my degree's in exercise science, and when I was in university, I was exposed to a swimming program that infused physiology and science along with athletic achievement. And through science, we were able to achieve greater things better. Our rate of improvement was better than anybody else in the country. So that's what introduced me to the basics of metabolism and everything, and some of the early equipment.
Were you a competitive swimmer earlier?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was a competitive swimmer for almost 20 years.
Oh, that's amazing.
And we were doing VO2 testing and everything in university, and we were using that data along with things that are much more popularized now, with stroke rates, stroke frequencies, things that we were doing in the 90s, and people are now talking about 20 years later.
That's fantastic.
Back then, they thought we were crazy.
You're a crackpot until you hit the jackpot.
Exactly. So that was just my schooling, and after schooling, I started to bounce around a little. I started to be a swim coach, and then I got into doing VO2 max testing and pulmonary function testing in physicians' offices, which is where I started to learn about COSMED equipment. I founded a company that partnered with physicians' offices, and we used COSMED equipment exclusively. At the peak of the company, we had 85 different systems, all of them being COSMED. And in 2008, I kind of switched sides. I went from my company that I founded over to the manufacturing side to kind of get a different picture, a wider picture.
Tell us a little bit about COSMED in general.
So COSMED is one of the world leaders within cardiopulmonary and pulmonary function testing. It's a family-owned Italian company that's been around for almost 40 years. They've had good exposure in the media with different things. They were showcased in the movie Skyfall, in Wired magazine, thanks to you, and is also really on stage with, and a lot of work with them and Apple in the development of Apple Watch, which we'll talk about.
So you were at COSMED, obviously, when we met at some point at a trade show. I think I had communicated with the president of COSMED, and he invited me out to a show that you guys were doing to have a talk, and that's where we actually met.
Yeah, that was where we met, and then things really started to blossom. Our personalities matched, and we were able to understand each other and speak the same language. And we definitely did some crazy things.
Yeah, and we were disrupting then, just somewhat like, it's really funny because I don't recall the story about the swimming stuff before. Well, I'm sure we talked about it at some point, but we were so in the weeds with metabolism. You were bringing me up to speed, and this is just for everyone's background. This is around 2012, and I bought a midlife crisis calorimeter to park in my garage, which became a metabolic lab. In fact, I think actually Kevin helped me mount my whiteboard up on the side of the wall. We were actually helping me build my lab when he was here. So anyway, during that period of time, so for the period just before I met you, you had been at COSMED, and you were really setting up systems all over the country. So we met at a show, it seems like it was San Diego, or what is that annual show? Because some of the people that listen might go to that.
Yeah, it was American College of Sports Medicine, their annual congress.
Okay, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about what you were doing at that point at COSMED when we met.
So at that point in COSMED, I was in charge of applications and training throughout the United States. So I had a lot of hands-on time with our customers, and mainly our customers were universities, some dietitians, some hospitals, but a lot of it were kind of sports and performance labs. We were installing equipment, teaching people how to use equipment for measuring VO2 max, anaerobic threshold, and other things that we're going to talk about in a little bit.
Yeah, and this is what's really interesting is this intersects with where Juliana was, because Juliana, you get your start in your career pretty much as an intersection of the same group. I mean, you weren't doing metabolism measurement, but in terms of doing this, you were big on the personal training side and the athletic side.
Well, I was a personal trainer while I was in graduate school. For about 12 years, I had my own business. So I was more doing very simple tests and just like to watch progress with my clients, but nothing as, technical and specific with equipment because I was doing in-home training.
Right. And I think what's going to be interesting about this conversation today is that Juliana really comes up from the classically trained personal trainer, right? From that perspective. Kevin, you come from this sort of non-traditional approach. You were disrupting in the 90s even. You were looking at the body in a different way. But even when we met, a lot of the framework that you were hanging that technology on was sort of pre our work together on metabolism. And so it sort of matched a lot of what they were teaching because, as you well know, I mean, when you were here when I was first learning this stuff, I started with what was taught in modern exercise physiology textbooks, right? That's where you had me start.
Yeah, we started with the current stuff, but then you went all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, and that becomes fun. So I think what's interesting thing about this is that this is really well-studied technology. And so as we were going through this, it seems like there was a period of time when we first started working where we were already identifying that nothing we were saying or doing or talking about, which it sort of clashed with what the popular things, something maybe Juliana would have told clients, in her classes. But at the time, what was surprising is that, Kevin would always pause and listen, and then he would go and say, well, the engineers don't disagree. Do you remember any of that stuff, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, as we were doing this, you were also helping me change my life. So
Oh, that's right.
I was learning things. I was learning things as we were going along and realizing something as simple that a calorie is not a calorie.
Right. Yeah. You're not just the hair club president. You're a member too, right? So that's right. I forgot.
Right.
How much weight did you lose? I just completely forgot about that whole process. How much weight did you lose?
50 pounds in 2.5 months.
That was fantastic. Congratulations. Yeah, I remember that. I remember you going, the big thing was you were going back to that same show and no one had seen you and we didn't tell anybody and they were just shocked that you were back at your swimming weight. You walked into the booth and tell me how Marco and all those guys reacted.
They're like, what did you do? And it was, as we always say, it was Crazy Ray.
Yeah, Cray Ray. So, okay, so you're working there at COSMED, you're setting up, you're going to a lot of universities. You and I were I was sharing papers with you. We were having phone conversations. I would visit you there. You would visit me here. So we were doing that. And then real quick to get the rest of where we are today, and then we can come back to that part, which is the fun part. But then after that, you get this offer from this amazing company that we both love.
We all love. Me too.
Tell me how that all came about.
I mean, a lot of it is kind of pie in the sky. I couldn't believe it. They reached out to me and said, "Okay, you got a really interesting background, and we'd like to talk to you about some stuff."
They who reached out to you?
This is a very small company called Apple.
Oh, Apple! I think I've heard of that.
I remember that. Oh my gosh, phone call that you gave me. Like, oh, what should I do?
It was crazy. I at first it took me a minute to realize that it was reality and I was not sleeping, not dreaming about it. It says, given my background and everything, it's not something you would expect. And so when I go in, nobody could even tell me what I was doing because, of course, the company is founded on secrecy, and everybody involved really takes that to heart, which is such a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful experience to be there, because it's all about making the best for the customers and surprising the customers with what can be. So I was brought in. They had to give me a title. I think in HR system, I was a human factors design engineer, but that's definitely not what I was doing. I was acting as an exercise physiologist.
And this super secret project, which is now public, was?
I was working on Apple Watch.
That was amazing.
Yeah, probably one of the first 100, 200 engineers working on Apple Watch and working very closely with all the big names as we were developing the experience. When I came in, they had an idea and knew what we wanted to do to have all these workouts and everything for customers. But we could either go about it one of a few ways. Could potentially buy some databases to get data, which other smart devices out there have done. At the time, it was Jawbone partnered with MotionX, et cetera.
And when with the data we're talking about specifically is the kinds of things that a watch, the kind of accelerometer or other data that basically translates motion and wiggling to sort of calories or counting laps, going back to what you were talking about with the pool, the stroke counters. I mean, Apple Watch really has so many different activities. And what you're saying here is that they decided to go back to the basics and measure it all and build their database from the ground up.
Yep. So everything was built from the ground up, and we created the largest physiologic database and the largest physiologic lab the world has ever seen. It was
That's just amazing.
On Good Morning America with, they had over 50 people exercising at once and doing all different activities, people riding bikes, people in climate chambers, people doing...
And this is people exercising with full metabolic measurement, not just
Estimated.
just wiggle monitors and lap counters. I mean, they had everybody measuring VO2 and VCO2 while they were exercising.
Exactly. I mean, we measured everything, and to understand how everybody is different, because you can look at metabolism and everything, and many of the things we considered norms are always based on small data sets.
Right.
But when you're dealing in data science, and you're trying to have some correlation, data scientists talk in terms of tens, thousands, millions
Right.
of data sets in order to get accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
So the accuracy of algorithms, et cetera. So you need a lot of data from a lot of different people doing a lot of different things in order to translate it so it can be applicable across the world.
Right. So then you finish out the Apple Watch. I still remember the day of the keynote that they were going to unveil it. And right as the thing started up, you sent me this little text message with your watch on your arm. And I got it like just seconds before the announcement. And I don't want to get you in trouble. But anyway, I don't think that matters, because by that time, I think the news was out. But it was an exciting time. And then after all of this stuff, obviously you had set up this incredible lab, had this amazing experience. We talked a lot even during your time there, even though I didn't know the specifics of the project. We also talked a lot about metabolism and kinds of around things, which was, that was the prime time when I was writing Metabolic Winter Hypothesis and Oxidative Priority and those papers. And, of course, I gave you all of that stuff before anything was published. And so you kept up with that. So then after Apple, you leave Apple and you actually return back to COSMED.
Yeah, so this time it was like each step of my career has always been a wider approach. When I left Apple, I came back to COSMED, but I came to COSMED. Some of it was I wanted to see how it is to live in Europe, because now I live in Rome.
Lucky man.
The corporate office.
Oh, I'm so envious.
And a lot of that it's still to deal with metabolism, and a lot of it in that case is dealing with my personal metabolism, understanding how the different foods and everything affect me, as well as my position now, working in education and training, but having kind of a global approach rather than just the country specific approach, which definitely opens your eyes, because you have to be able to translate, have to be able to understand different cultures, many, many, many different aspects, which is very different than working just in the States.
Right.
So.
Right. And so you're doing the education, as we had said in the beginning, for COSMED and helping people. Are you still involved with lab setups at all or anything like you were before?
Occasionally I do installations. My team, we handle a lot that are out in Europe, but a lot of it is also working with our distributors and resellers around the world and all of our subsidiaries.
Right. And it was amazing during the time when Kevin was here. He was the go-to guy everybody would call. And so all the time when we were working together, he would constantly begin these quick calls. And it was so amazing to have him just pick up the phone. Okay, yeah, go to this menu, what's this number here? It was like an encyclopedia of calorimeters. and that's exactly what I need. And so let me integrate real quick my story in here and then Juliana's story, because I think from there we can start, maybe debunking some of the myths that are out there, or at least pushing it closer to the truth. I don't know that it's 100% myths like some things, but I do believe people oversimplify this. And in that process, they throw out a lot of good data. So for me, Kevin comes, he has my calorimeter delivered here and comes to set it up. And we were actually preparing, because in the next week or so, we were going to have Stephen Leckhart from Wired Magazine come in and do a bunch of experiments, both in water. We did swimming, we did cold and warm water. We performed experiments on running. We performed experiments on kettlebells. We did immersion. But we did a lot of experiments, and Kevin was here for the first part of that just to make sure everything was going and sort of bringing me up to speed. And I'll reflect on this one moment. I don't know if Kevin will remember, but back at that time, I was working real closely with Wim Hof, and we were looking at the mild cold stress because a decade ago, that was more of my focus. And then when I was doing the mild cold stress, a lot of people challenged me on the calories and the weight loss side. And this is where I sort of dig in. When I don't know something, I don't pretend. I just go dig in. And so I built, and I think Kevin will remember this, I built my own calorimeter with oxygen and CO2 sensors, and I had really raw data. But it's really interesting. One of the last times I remember getting sick and having a fever was with that. And I actually measured how much my body and my metabolism, or at least my oxygen uptake and CO2 production, was increasing for the elevated temperature, went back and compared that to what the models and the data said, and it actually tracked pretty good. So I was doing a real rudimentary oxygen and carbon dioxide, and we'll get into this in a minute. I know for a lot of people, you don't know how metabolism's measured, and we'll go into detail. But with that setup, so Kevin's setting up my calorimeter, and one of the things Wim Hof had been working with me with is this idea of how to relax and breathe such that you can actually generate more warmth or heat. Remember, when you get cold, you tend to vasoconstrict, and then the blood flows out of your extremities, out of your hands and fingers. You don't get frostbite of the head or the toes or the nose or the ear. I mean, you get frostbite of the toes, the nose, the fingers and the ears, but not the head. The body protects the core, the brain and of course your core organs. So there is a process by which you're trying to warm up in the cold, which I was very well practiced at then. I have a swim spa in my backyard that has a heat pump on it, so I can take it down to 45F or up to 102F. And so I was, very used to cold immersion and then this relaxation and breathing that what I would do that would start to generate heat. You could physically feel my hands get warmer and my feet get warmer. And this wasn't magic. This was just allowing the blood flow to there. So it's not really spooky. It's just a matter of your body letting go and not taking the fight or flight kind of a response where you thwart that blood flow to your fingers. So anyway, I'm sitting there and Kevin has just calibrated my calorimeter for the first time. He said, "Here, just sit down. I'll just have you get under the nutritional hood. This is a large hood that goes over your head so that you're just breathing." He's measuring. Actually, no, it wasn't. I had the mask on at that time. I do remember. I had the mask on. That's right. The Kevin, that was alcohol. We did alcohol later with the hood. But anyway, so we were having fun, guys. This was great. Kevin and I, we have music going. So he's trying to calibrate it, and so I'm just sitting there and I'm just relaxing and doing this same exercise I would normally do. And just feeling it. And then I stopped.
And I was freaking out.
You were freaking out. So tell them what you were seeing on your side. You were watching my RQ change.
Exactly. So I'm watching his breathing and how he's exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide, and things are going up and things are going down. And I'm thinking, this is a brand new system.
Yeah, you're panicking.
And I'm panicking, trying to do it, trying to see.
Right. Because we had this big deadline. So guys, imagine he's there to try to help set up, make sure nothing's wrong, and he's sitting there thinking, "Oh gosh, I think the calorimeter's not working correct."
Yeah, I thought something was broken, and then you just start laughing.
Because I was looking over, and as I was doing this, I could just watch the little graph go down, and I could watch the graph go back up, and we've really never done that to the level that we should. I mean, we had fun that day with it. I could definitely move it. And I don't know how much of that. This is not something I push at hardcore science or whatever, because I haven't done enough work on it, but I could definitely move the needle by just relaxing and doing the kinds of things that I would do to warm my body in a cold environment, which I think that's really exciting to think about. I mean, I always wanted to do this with Wim Hof. I did it with my small portable calorimeter, but it wasn't sensitive enough. The homemade, the DIY version, I went over there for a week and we were hanging out in Amsterdam and we measured a couple of times, but it wasn't accurate enough to really see, to see the data. But so anyway, this is where we start all this. I just want to give you guys sort of the backdrop, and I'm going to fast forward a little bit. And we'll come back to this to Juliana, because when we first met, this was kind of a crazy background for her. Sort of tell your story, Juliana. How do you plug into metabolism here?
Yeah, well, Kevin, similar to you, I was more of the academic learned. I learned about how metabolism works, and while I was personal training and working with clients and measuring stuff, but not, like I said, not the highly technical, not with actual calorimetry and all that, because I was doing in-home personal training. But I love fitness. I've always you've been fascinated by fitness and nutrition. And I was gobbling up as much information as I could. And when I was in graduate school, I was on a mission to figure out what the secrets are. How do we, lose weight, and how do we maximize exercise and the fitness, the advantages of fitness. And I just wanted to find out exactly how it all works. Meanwhile, personally speaking, I was coming from this background of growing up in Los Angeles as a dancer and an actress. And I was constantly told to lose weight because you have to be super thin and Hollywood. And so I was always trying to study weight loss and reading all about that. And so here I am for many, many years, decades, really exercising 2 hours a day. I love exercise. But I was doing that and then eating healthy, it changed, evolved over the years. But we always joke that I was at the same weight since I was a child. Like I grew up, I was this one weight except for my 2 pregnancies. And no matter what I did, no matter how much I exercised, no matter how much muscle I put on, no matter if I ran a marathon, I would just, and it was mind blowing because I'm like, well, what am I doing wrong? I'm following everything I've learned. And it was fine. I was never like overweight.
No, we're talking about 12 pounds to 15 pounds. So we weren't talking it wasn't like you were overweight really. You were just at
But I wasn't at where I wanted to be for Hollywood. Yeah,
yes,
I wasn't like exactly where I wanted to be. So anyway, as fine. I was kind of, okay, well, my cholesterol's good, I'm healthy and I feel good and I'm fit and all that. But then I met Raymond. So just over 3 years ago, when we met, and I was, obviously this is my favorite subject, metabolism and nutrition and fitness. And we just started talking and I'm like, well, I'll try this. I was like, I want to know, like I'm on a mission to learn. Like the scientist in me too, just wanted to understand and experience, but personally too, I was like, okay, I haven't tried this yet. What's going on? And he just flipped my mind, like stuff that I had learned, probably similar to you, Kevin, in school, like, calories in, calories out, all those general things that were taught, where there was a lot more to the story. And I think it'd be really good for our audience to talk about a lot of that after we finish this intro stuff, because it's very confusing. And so when I did try it, it was 18 days and I lost 12 pounds. I'd never been to that weight except for on my way up when I was a kid. And it just changed my thinking, the whole oxidative priority, the whole metabolic winter hypothesis. Those two things are so complex and yet so simple and mind-blowing. So it changed my life forever. And it's been pretty extraordinary to watch it, to be able to implement this with our clients over the years.
Right.
Too.
And what was so interesting is that after this weight loss, immediately following this weight loss, Juliana was speaking in Miami and so stopped over for like a day.
Oh yeah, to meet you on the way.
And I measured her metabolism that next day, and we'll talk about that
status post being on this weight loss.
So she had just been on it. So for all those people that worry about, you're losing weight too fast, your metabolism's going to crash, whatever. And, sure enough, her metabolism was,
as predicted,
1378 kilocalories, and it was predicted as being 1278, but I guess you guys use the Harris-Benedict, whatever prediction the COSMED software uses. Yeah. So in fact, her metabolism was slightly up at 107% of predicted. And what was really neat is that and we'll talk about what this means in a second, but her RQ was around 0.77. And so that translates that Juliana was burning about 77% of her, and the 77, don't confuse those two numbers, around 77% of her metabolism when she was being measured 18 days after, as she had been dieting for 18 days, was coming from fat, and 21% of it was coming from glucose. So what was really neat is not only had her metabolism not crashed, but in fact, she was doing what should be obvious to everyone at this point, that when your body is restricted in calorie, it really doesn't go for brains and heart tissue and liver. It actually burns your energy storage organ, which is called adipose tissue and fat. And this is what we see over and over. And it's, we saw the same thing with you. Now, Kevin, when you did yours, not only did you track your metabolism when you were doing your weight loss, but as I recall, another interesting piece of hardware that COSMED makes is the bod pod. So you actually tracked your body fat during this rapid loss of 50 pounds, and even that was actually very, very telling, right?
Yeah, so a couple things. My metabolism before we started and everything, I've always used my metabolism if I'm checking equipment, et cetera, because I've been 2,000 calories a day plus or minus 150 calories through everything. And this is through the weight loss that we did when caloric restrictive diet, eating 200-300 calories a day, through ketosis, through many different things, and my metabolism has not changed at all.
Yep.
Even now I'm doing CrossFit, and it's up maybe a little because my lean body mass has increased. But when, in 2012, when we were doing this and I was doing the rapid weight loss, I would get into a bod pod, not once a month or anything. It would be 4 or 5 times a week.
How fun is that?
So different, and these were different bod pods around the country. So I would get in, and part of what I was doing is I had to check to make sure the equipment worked. So by getting in the equipment, I could see it. So would do that and would check and body composition went from 30% down to, I think the lowest was 21 in that very short time. And Bob Pod uses different prediction equations than Harris Benedict because they predict your metabolism based on lean body mass. They use an equation, the Nelson equation, and a little bit, one thing I wanted to add was Juliana is talking about, understanding, exercise and being passionate there. Coming as a physiologist, I would always look in and say, yes, you need to exercise to lose weight. You need to exercise for different things. Now I look, you need to exercise to be healthy.
Yes,
that's right.
Me too.
Yeah, you can exercise and lose weight. It's not that it's impossible. In fact, when I lost my original weight, I was doing Bill Phillips' Body for Life. I was doing, 6 workouts a week, the upper body, lower body, hit training, so you can do it, but it's not required. And what we've seen hundreds of times now is that there seems to be an antagonism between exercise, which is more of an anabolic go-grow physiology, and weight loss, which is more of a catabolic, conserve, metabolic winter, conserve for time, for times when times are lean and scarcity. And what the body seems to do during those times is it basically counts more on fat. And that's what you saw. That's what Juliana's seen. And that's what, hundreds of other people have seen happen. And you got to do it. And we were doing all of the early work for oxidative priority at that time. And so as you were doing this, you were measuring like I did on my experiments, you were measuring your metabolism, nearly daily, and all these bod pod measurements, we didn't see any contradictions. And I think that's the part that's so fun, is to imagine not only that, but when we look at the liters of oxygen and we look at what the measurements we got, we weren't really that far off from Lavoisier's measurements in 1790. Yep. I mean, to me, that's kind of crazy to think about.
Well, it's crazy because we've gone so far from that, and it really just all comes back to the same thing, and we've just gotten so lost in the translation.
Yeah, the human body hasn't changed.
Right.
Yeah. And even though he was using rudimentary, and real quick, let me just tell everybody a background here with Lavoisier. So Lavoisier is the guy he actually is the person that gives calorimetry his name. He talks about why he's deciding to call it that, even though there may be better things to call it. He's just going to do it, and that's the way it is. But what he does is he's measuring the same kind of parameters. So remember, he's discovering oxygen. We're just discovering oxygen. So not only does he not know that metabolism exists, but he discovers oxygen, and his significance is he ends up equating the chemistry of respiration with the chemistry of combustion. That is, burning a flame becomes the same as in this case, a guinea pig, or even a man. It becomes the flame of your life. And so this was neat, but he measured his lab assistant there in 26 degrees C, and he was measuring 400 milliliters per minute oxygen. Then he dropped the temperature in the lab down to 12 degrees C. He measured 450 milliliters per minute of oxygen going up. Remember, he's just discovering oxygen and he's measuring it. During digestion, that metabolism boost you're going to get from the meals that everybody talks about, yep, it went up to 435 milliliters per minute. And then during exercise, it went to 1,085 milliliters per minute. Now, Kevin, based on numbers today, if you were walking to any exercise physiology lab, how far are those off from what we would measure today?
No, it's very similar. I mean, most people look at resting oxygen consumption. We are a little more specific. Is about three and a half milliliters of oxygen per kilogram body weight per minute.
Yeah.
And then things go and change from there. But there's, of course, if you normalize for body weight, which is what we do now, which allows us to be more specific, and we can compare across different populations better than just raw numbers.
Right.
But essentially, they're the same.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the accuracy of the equipment has changed.
Sure.
And the ease of use, but the parameters haven't.
Right. And so this is amazing. So part of what Kevin and I were doing, and this then it intersects on the other end of this. So Kevin comes in the beginning side of this, Juliana comes towards the end of this. And there is, and what you hear and what we're saying is that I really want to reinforce the point you and Juliana made, which is exercise for health, active for health, because it's one of our health span habits. Absolutely, there's some really great things. So I don't really want everyone to continue to believe that I think exercise is bad or wrong. Now, if you exercise to the point that you're chronically overnourished, that's kind of a different thing. Won't get into it today, but we deal with some of that in the book. But what it really comes down to is that we have a consistent data from 1794 forward. We have all of these measurements, way more difficult to measure, and we come back to the lab here and go through all of Kevin's data, all the ones I did for oxidative. I mean, hundreds of metabolisms I measured. In fact, another one we might talk about, Kevin, is the idea that you also were part of my grand scheme. I stayed at the Westin downtown in Atlanta, and this was kind of fun. And so Kevin got me a K4 at the time, which was their portable backpack unit. It's this calorimeter, another $30,000 or $40,000 backpack unit, and I actually stayed at the hotel. And then Kevin and I snuck down to the very basement. We got into the stairway, and I say snuck, but the doors were open.
Yeah, if you stayed at the hotel, that's not really
we
sneaking.
We technically are allowed to use the stairs. We did ask them, could we use the stairs? Did we not? We did ask the guard, and he said, you're allowed to use the stairs.
Legit.
You have it, as long as you have a key to go to your room, you're allowed to use the stairs. And the downtown Westin, by the way, is 73 or 74 stories. It was like the second tallest hotel in the United States. So we went downstairs, and then Kevin did a tech support call for about 30 minutes, and I just sat on the steps, quietly to let my metabolism rest so we could get a really good resting number. And then Kevin held the camera, and we started, and we climbed in 20 minutes. We climbed 73 stories of stairs, right? Because we wanted to talk about exercise and burning fat. And what was so amazing is that, the amount of calories, pause for just a second and think about that. 73 floors, 20 minutes. We weren't running the stairs like Amanda was doing. And we did a smaller version the day before. And Amanda, who was another person, worked with Kevin at that time. She actually ran the stairs, and we did a test run there before we went downtown. But anyway, here it is. The point, it was 3 1/8 Oreo cookies worth of energy. So it's like even in total calories, now I don't have the data in front of me, and obviously most of those calories came from glucose, and we'll talk about that. We'll move into this part here, but the point here is none of this contradicted anything that we were actually seeing. It just contradicted the story and the narrative that seems to be out there, that wiggling is connected with burning energy, and burning energy is connected with a deficit. And that would be true if you only had one storage tank of fuel, but you don't. You have a glucose storage tank and you have a fat storage tank, and that's the wrinkle. Is that a fair way to put it, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, people can just relate to that and just think, okay, just the idea of how you feel if you're climbing 73 floors, you're so winded, et cetera, but in reality, it doesn't require so much energy the energy that requires in the body is basically just to keep the lights on. It's, in a lot of people, it's 70 to 90% of the energy that we burn in a day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So when we talk about energy, I'll put this one thing here, and then I want to, between you and Juliana's conversation, I think we can learn a lot as you guys talk through this. But so just to back up, when we're talking about measuring metabolism, what we're really talking about is the heat that we're generated. So if you remember when I talked about that flame, another thing that's common that we will do in calibrating a calorimeter is we'll actually take a small alcohol lamp, like you would see in a chemistry lab, light and burn a known amount of fuel. So as we're burning that fuel, the alcohol is being consumed. It's burning and it's creating carbon dioxide and water, and it's also consuming oxygen. And so in a small little chamber, you can do that and weigh how much fuel before you started, how much afterwards, and is it in the ballpark? And just to give you guys an idea, a little alcohol flame, at least the one I had, this little flame would be about 2 people. It would be the energy of 2 people. And I want to say this to reinforce what Kevin's saying. So in other words, it would be about 5,000 or so calories if you had this little alcohol. And you get this really great straight line. And then as you're producing that carbon dioxide and consuming that oxygen, you can take a ratio, you can compare those 2 numbers together, and that's that number you heard us say earlier, which is the RQ, the respiratory quotient, or RER. If you're a physiologist, you would say respiratory exchange ratio. Is that correct, Kevin?
That's correct.
Yeah. So what this is that when things burn, whether it's, beeswax or soy wax or alcohol, or
body fat,
the body fat, or, amino acids or glucose or sugar, you then form carbon dioxide and water. And so what we're able to do is compare the amount that was on the input side and what comes on the outside side. And the really great part about this is chemistry. If you remember chemistry class when you used to do balanced equations, it's just hard chemistry. So for example, if you download our oxidative priority paper and go into like figure 2, wherever I do the calculations, you'll see that we've calculated that little ratio, the carbon dioxide that came out on one side, the oxygen that was consumed when the burning happened. And we've converted that. In fact, I did developed the general equations for this. So you can put if you have the molecular weight of any fuel that you can use, you can calculate this theoretical RQ. And what Kevin would do when he was setting up experiments is he would use standard gases. So he would take a cylinder of gas with oxygen and CO2 that was calibrated and certified, and he would make sure that the instrument was reading the right percentages. But then he also, if he was really doing it, might take this alcohol and he would look for those numbers. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I mean, we were doing this at your house, so I just took, a lot of times you would use 100% ethanol, which it's very difficult to get, and typically you need a prescription, but as soon as you open it, it distills down to 96%.
Yeah.
95%. So I just did the simple thing and bought a bottle of grain alcohol.
Yep.
So it was nice and easy, and we went and we just burned it to make sure. It's a quality control metric that's been used in metabolic carts, calorimeters, for almost 35 years since there was a big company out there, Delta Track.
Right.
And they needed the ethanol to actually calibrate the system.
Right.
Since then, it's become more of a quality control metric and accepted validation.
And so this number, what's really great is if you're burning pure fat, basically it's about 0.7 on the scale. If you're burning pure glucose, it's 1.0. And if you're burning alcohol, it's around 0.67. And then all the amino acids average out to about 0.82, 0.84. So protein is right in the middle of those two, which is great because metabolism go up or down, but it doesn't shift it left or right so that we can still know how much fat, how much glucose are you burning. And so we took that same PGA, as I recall, and you fixed me a drink, and we actually had me drink some alcohol, and we watched my first nutritional hood experiment. I said I knew that one came later. You had done those experiments. You said, watch this. And so we had me drink that. And as that alcohol started taking over within the first few minutes, 10, 15, we slowly watched my respiratory quotient go down towards the 0.67. It never got obviously that low because he didn't get me that drunk, but it worked. And we were having fun. And this was, this is the very beginning. So I think what's really interesting here is all three of us came at this from this passion, and nobody had an opinion or anything we were trying to prove. We were just moving along and trying to explain the things that we saw. And, later I built a soy candle that if I light 3 flames on the candle, it was equivalent to my metabolism. And when there was just 2, I had a CBS correspondent that came in to interview me, and hers ended up being 2. So when you would burn this candle, soy wax is basically soy fat. That's what wax is. It's a fat. So when it burns, you get this perfect line at 0.7, and then you get this metabolism line that's really straight and flat. So we saw this one with alcohol where it would say 0.67, and Kevin say, yep, as a quality control, it's working right. It should be at 0.67. It is at 0.67. Oh, when we burn the soy candle using the same thing. So you imagine you're burning something and you've got this little hood, sniffing the CO2 and the oxygen environment around it. Yep, sure enough, it's at this level, and the amount of change in that energy equals exactly how much the lamp changed in weight or the soy candle changed. And in the case of the alcohol, it was 0.67. And here's the part I want everybody to take home. So before we dig to this next geeky part, the part I want you to take home is this. When you're losing weight at the most rapid level you can imagine, and for us, our clients, it's 0.6 to 0.8 pounds a day. If you look at the longest medically supervised water fast, 382 days, 276 pounds, they lost their averaged 0.7 pounds a day and that's just water. So the point here is that when I'm burning a small little candle that I poured in a jar, and Kevin, you've seen this candle. I know, Juliana, you've seen this car. Mm-hmm. When I light these 3 flames and put this on my electronic balance, and I just let it burn, the weight of the candle changes at the same rate my body weight changes if I'm eating nothing. So just think about that for a minute. Think about the Oreo cookies, the 3 1/8 Oreo cookies that we were talking about, and think about what Kevin's saying about most of your metabolism is just keeping the lights on. So go grab a couple of candles, 1 or 2 candles, and say to yourself, is it better to try to burn and make that candle burn a little faster? Or is it better for me not to put the food in the first place? I mean, is that a good visceral summary for both of you of how your worldviews changed when we looked at this?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, it's definitely eye-opening, and it's simple.
It really is. Why don't you start real quick, Kevin? Let's back up and just tell somebody when we're measuring metabolism, what are we really measuring?
Okay, so when you're measuring metabolism, you're measuring at a cellular level the substrates that your body is using for energy. Because at the end, body runs on energy, and it runs on ATP. And it can generate ATP just a few different ways. It can generate it using oxygen. So as we consume oxygen, we consume oxygen to burn fat, to convert fat into energy. Or we use another substrate, which is carbohydrates, so sugar, glucose. And as we convert glucose to energy, we produce CO2. So, I mean, the metabolic process is just our conversion of food to energy.
That's right. And so as you say that this is at the cellular level, what ends up happening is that all of these cells in our body end up connecting via the vascular system and then eventually the pulmonary system via exhaling and inhaling. And if you're measuring that each one of those breaths on a breath by breath basis, what you're essentially doing is averaging all of these cells and all of the ATP production that's going on over your whole body. And you're saying, here's how much CO2 is coming out. Here's how much oxygen that went in. And this is how much energy you could have produced. It's a hard number. Obviously there's some error in the measurement, but the actual foundation of that measurement is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's extremely straightforward, and the accuracy of equipment has only improved over years.
Right.
And the reason we take an average, you can look at earlier times when they're trying to measure metabolism. They would lock somebody in a chamber for 24 hours and measure their heat output throughout that entire time. Now we can do it in 15 minutes. Yeah.
Right. I was just going to say they're in an insulated, like a thermos, basically, for a person, and they're running water through the walls and are literally measuring the water temperature going in and the water temperature coming out, and the actual increase in water temperature is a real measure of how hot is the flame. Right? And you would call this direct calorimetry.
This is the difference between direct and indirect calorimetry. Can you explain a little bit,
direct calorimetry is, as we said, it's sealing somebody in a thermos and measuring the heat output. Also able to measure the food that comes in. Typically, it has to come from a metabolic kitchen, so they know exactly the calories that the person is consuming, and they measure many things. This is very time-consuming, extremely expensive, very difficult. People don't necessarily like being stuck in a chamber for 24 hours. There are many downsides to it.
Pick me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Because of that,
it's only done in a few places around the world, and it's typically done in research only. But they've learned over years of research that if we take a snapshot, indirect, meaning we can create a chamber around the respiratory system of the body, and we can do a measurement. Some places will do it 15 minutes, some places will do it up to 45 minutes. Some people who have their own metabolic lab may do it for 3 hours, right?
Right? Every day for 6
company.
weeks, 4 hours in a metabolic
so it's just
nutritional hood.
Creating this bubble around the person. We can take a snapshot, and that snapshot is the variability is only a few percentage points if you look at it throughout the course of a day. Throughout the course of weeks to months, it may be up to 5 to 10%, but it's still a very small amount. That's taking one measurement from today and trying to apply it 3 months from now. But if you take multiple measurements and you get multiple measurements, understanding that ideally this is done in a fasted state, because as we eat and we are metabolizing food, then our metabolism does change. So the thermogenic effect of food.
Oh, and can I ask you, this is a great question for you to explain, from people to hear from you, is that this whole idea, this thermic effect of food, and that's why people are on these high protein diets and all these things that are like boosting their, quote unquote, boosting their metabolism. And so can you talk about that and just bunk that, why that doesn't matter so much?
Hasn't changed in all these years. Even with a lot of exercise and putting on lean body mass, I've done, caloric restrictive diets. Even I've done ketosis diets where I was down 10 grams of carbohydrates a day. My RQ was 0.7.
That's rough.
When I exercised, as you exercise, it gets higher. I know, Ray, you were saying that RQ of sugar is 1.0. As we exercise, we continue to generate CO2 because of lactic acid, et cetera, why our body's muscles burn. And typically at like 1.2, 1.3 is when people will stop exercise because it's too painful. Our blood has become too acidic, et cetera. But in this case, when I was in ketosis, I could get barely above 1.0. Even as hard as I was exercising, I couldn't get any higher because there was no sugar. So everything that I was building, the CO2 I was creating was from the generation of lactic acid. But it's not,
right.
My metabolism did not change. And
right. And even the short-term bumps that you have after a meal is essentially getting rid of calories that are in your vascular system that you can't store. Your body can't store them. So everybody has the idea of alcohol. If you take that example where you drink that alcohol, your blood alcohol content goes up, and then 2 to 4 hours later when they let you out of the drunk tank, after you get caught, pulled over, then your blood alcohol is down. And where did that alcohol go? It didn't get turned to fat. It actually got metabolized, and your body prioritized this. And it does this on all kinds of food. And so what Kevin is saying here, which is, an important point, is that even when he changed his diet significantly, those calories that you're eating and that rise that both Lavoisier measured 200 years ago, and we can still measure today, that rise is not tapping into extra calories. If you look at even the old school way of saying a pound of fat a week, 3,500 calories or 500 calories a day, right? You guys probably memorized that in school, right?
Oh, yeah.
And even at that, the answer is if those 500 calories extra a day come from glucose, it really doesn't matter. And it's one of these things that I think people really don't fully appreciate, that you have to take it from the right tank. You have to take
the concept you taught me that it's the visual is so visceral for me is the glycogen treadmill.
Yeah.
It's explain that. I mean, because it's true.
So when you get on a treadmill and you start burning, your respiratory quotient is going to go up to be 0.91, 0.96. Correct, Kevin? Right?
I mean, you're breathing hard. Your legs aren't really burning, but you're just going along for a while. Yeah, it's around there.
Right. Yeah. And so you're doing that now. Well, what ends up happening? Well, what ends up happening is now your target heart rates and what the treadmill will say, the fat burning zone, compared to what? This is a Juliana Ray thing. Compared to what? Well, compared to burning zero, because you were going all out and you're burning 100% glucose, if you go at a lower rate or you're sub VO2 max and you're not building up lactate and lactic acid the way Kevin was describing, then you're going to be burning some fat, but you're going to probably be burning less percentage fat than when you measured your metabolism resting before you got on the treadmill. Is that fair to say, Kevin?
And if you really look at it, those fat burning zones are typically 45 to 65% of age predicted max heart rate, which is 220 minus your age.
Yes.
The cardio zone, they say, is 65 to 85%. But it's that 220 minus your age. If anyone is really interested in looking up research, please try to find the research article on that. It doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
And the other thing with the glycogen treadmill I always think about is that, and then you get off the treadmill and replete your glycogen with food.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's like a treadmill in terms of like more metaphorically speaking, is you're just on and off, in and out. And then you're not even talking about tapping into body fat. And
And I'll tell you, one of the grand failures of that I did in my life is one day I got all Forrest Gump in the lab. And I was watching if anybody knows the Great Courses, I love the Great Courses. Juliana loves the Great Courses. I'm a geek. I love watching the Great Courses. And so I was watching some series and I was on the treadmill and I wanted to do exactly this. So I had just been doing a small diet test. I measured my waking, fasted metabolism in the morning. You know the setup here, Kevin. So I went straight from my bedroom into the lab, laid down, did a 15-minute on the hood, measured what it was, and I started watching the great courses, and it was a physiology course that they do. And so I was watching, I thought, I'm just going to go do the walking treadmill thing because, everybody was into the walking desk. Remember when that was the big thing?
Oh, yeah, I had one.
Did you have one?
I did. I loved it.
So everybody was in the walking desk, and I thought, oh, wow. And I remember at that time, Michael Greger, Dr. Greger, who we interviewed earlier, Michael Greger was always doing this walking treadmill.
Every interview, he'd be swaying on his treadmill.
And I thought, well, this will be some interesting data. So I go out and I pull the cart over near the treadmill. You know where that is, Kevin. And I pull the cart over there and start measuring my RQ. And what was really interesting is I keep walking and walking. And so long story short, I ended up 8 hours later at around 22 miles. And for the life of me, that I didn't go a little further and get 26.2 to have walked a marathon. I've got to do it again just because of that. But I just walked and walked and I walked, and then I'm tired of walking now. I'll just stop. But the point is I walked, but my respiratory quotient did creep up just like we saw. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do have them on the machine. I need to dig them up someday. But here's what the net was, is that yes, my metabolism increased while I was walking. I did expend energy, let's say about 100 calories a mile, and I walked 22 miles. So I expended about 2,200 calories, give or take, or so for the thing. But I was really only burning around 10% fat. So I was burning 220 calories. And even though my resting metabolism rate earlier, before I started walking, was like 17 or 1,800, something like that, I was burning almost 70% of those fat calories. So if you actually calculate it out, I would have burned more fat calories binge watching
great courses
on the couch and having not eaten in either case than I would have walking, even though I burned more total calories for sure walking like Forrest Gump for 22 miles. So
exactly.
I would love to redo that, exacting so that we all did it together. I mean, one of the things I'd like to do, and I'm going to put it out there now, because as we're starting to build our podcast and build our following, we're going to put a Patreon account or Subscribestar, one of the accounts out there for sponsoring what we're doing. And one of the things I would love to do is build at least a chamber out there. And it would be really fun, especially if we can, make excuses to get COSMED to help support us and get you over here too.
Or us to roam.
Or us to roam. Yeah, I guess we could always do that.
I'm going to keep putting that out there too.
There you go. But the idea of doing something where people could be involved and understand what we're going to do and just start doing some of these everyday experiments, because I want us people... I don't want to be just the person poo-pooing exercise. I don't want that to be the message you walk away with. What I want to do is say, look, you're not going to out-exercise your mouth. That's just all there is to it. If you don't control your diet, then the other part is going to be difficult. The wiggling part is very complex and very well documented. And all of that fat that you burn ends up becoming exhaled CO2, right? And how many liters of air do you have to exhale to get a liter of CO2? Do you know that off the top of your head?
No,
it's like 25 or 28 or something like that.
Well, 25 liters to consume a liter of
oxygen and 28 liters to remove a liter of CO2, right? I know that's and eventually I need to do the back calculation for 1 pound of fat on that. Maybe I'll have that done by the time this posts. But so the things that we're talking about with a person, with Kevin, who is here watching me do all this, obviously Juliana coming at it from have a master's in nutrition and going through and studying this in grad school, and then also coming at this as doing exercise and being a personal trainer. What's really amazing is that the stuff that we're saying isn't that controversial.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, people are open to it now.
And I kind of want to cap what you're saying and say that you're not poo-pooing exercise, period. You're just saying it's not the key function in weight loss. And it actually, we've seen with our clients, it could actually disrupt the weight loss process because of hunger and other mechanisms. But that said, there are dozens or hundreds of physiological advantages that exercise, facilitates and is crucial in a health promoting diet and a health span lifestyle. So that is the takeaway message in terms of exercise. Like, we want you to exercise. It's crucial for longevity and health span and health, but there's, limitations. I would love to also talk about the other thing that happens. I don't know if you're finished with metabolism, but in terms of what we're seeing as, we're talking about health span and healthy aging, and this problem of fighting to achieve these whatever benefits you're doing in your years initially, trying to accomplish these athletic endeavors and trying to achieve optimal fitness and all of these things that people kind of go and try to make these incredible leaps of whatever they
athletic performance.
Yeah, athletic performance.
Competitive sports.
Either competitive or just even self-competitive, just trying to reach all of these new heights. But what's interesting is what we're seeing in terms of health span is this, it doesn't last like that. Like, we need to think more of how do we make this into our 50s and 60s and 70s and stay healthy. And sometimes all of those goals initially end up with injuries. And we're seeing a lot of people, myself included, dealing with lifelong injuries due to this, this prowess and this determination. So maybe having that idea that you don't need to like push for your metabolism, for weight loss, for all of that will kind of help some people navigate fitness with a different perspective, with a more of a long-term perspective.
Yeah. And this goes back to the first interview I did with Rich Roll, which is this idea or concept of a soft landing, which means you've been competitive, you're young, that's a great time to be putting on muscle, and you're in the reproductive prime state, and during that time, you feel good, you feel great. But after reproductive prime, what's not so clear is keeping yourself constantly in that anabolic go, grow. I mean, think about it. Bodybuilders abuse insulin too, because it's part of putting on muscle mass, right? So the idea that you want to stay in that hardcore anabolic state for as long as you can is different. And now for you, Kevin, since you moved from the South originally, being in Atlanta where you were when I met, and then you went to San Francisco, which is, foodie capital of the world, right? But people are a little bit more health conscious. And now you plop in Rome right there on the Mediterranean, and sort of the lifestyle there, obviously Marco and his family, I mean, they're all lean and thin. So have you seen a food lifestyle change or anything associated with the food side of that equation that Juliana's talking about, the other side of activity and how people live different there?
Well, it's people are always afraid of carbs. But I mean, I live in the carb capital of the world.
No, you're not allowed to say the C word. Say starches and fruits.
Well,
pasta and pizza.
Pasta and pizza. Right.
So, but it's all about processed food versus unprocessed food and fresh food, and the better quality food you get, the healthier you're going to be.
And serving size too.
Exactly. Serving size. I recently was back in the United States with my fiance, and we going to different places, and I wanted her to try different foods and whatnot. So it was one meal, we ordered 2 entrees. After that, we started cutting in half, and it was still too big for what we're used to. So it's in a short time. I mean, even my perception, et cetera, has completely changed compared to Western society. Everyone here, they don't have to worry about exercise. Why? Because many of the cities in Italy, it's almost illegal to drive inside the city, or it's very difficult to park, et cetera. So people will park outside the city and walk in. So they are physically active all the time and all through their life. People like to be within walking distance of a cafe, walking distance of the grocery store, and traveling around. And it's not as if they're using mass transportation so much.
Yeah, and that's the difference between active and fit and exercise. And it's like a completely, and if you look at all of the, we talk about the blue zones and all the longest lived populations, a couple of which are nearby where you are, it's about being active. And we always say that active is exercise isn't the opposite of sedentary. Active is, and it's great that it's still like that.
Yeah, if you look and circling back to Apple Watch, et cetera, it's all around 3 simple things. Sit less, be more active, and get some exercise.
Yeah, so I love that.
exercise is really good. It's really good for, as you said, many, many, many different things. It's not there as the crutch to say, okay, as saying to lose weight, I need to exercise and that's it. No. But it's a component to a healthy lifestyle. And even circling back to when we're saying, okay, the difference in calories and whatnot from even a ketosis diet, one thing I've learned with all my experimentation is the fact that if you cut out a macronutrient, if you cut out, starches and fruits and you decrease that, you're going to lose weight. That's ketosis. You cut out fats, you're going to lose weight because you cut out a macronutrient. You eliminate a fuel source, then your body almost always goes into a fat burning state because it needs the energy.
Right. So this is left or right side food triangle eating versus bottom feeding. Bottom feeding is steak and potatoes, burger and fries, pasta and meat sauce. So we would always see most recipes classically, because most of the time getting enough food economically has been the drive for a lot of our cultural norms in eating. And so today that's not the problem. That's not the case. And so then we end up chronically overnourished. And to bring sort of maybe to bring this to an end and bring this to another fine point for Juliana, what she was saying about being overly active, it is possible, and I won't say that this is hard science right now, but it's certainly possible that a person could be so active later in life that they drive the excess consumption of food, and that chronic overnutrition doesn't outpace or outstrip the benefits they're getting from the hormetic stress. Because for sure, the stress of exercise is a stress that your body responds to. And as David Sinclair says, what doesn't kill us makes us live longer, right? So that may be, a fun play on this. But the truth is that what he would also say is that, he doesn't do that extreme stuff every day a week. He does it once a week. And he's active because he's at Harvard and they're walking around the same kind of thing in Boston where you can walk. It's a very walkable city. But the fact is that, you can be active in a competitive way to the point where it might be possible to be chronically overnourished. And so by reining back that hard, intense activity,
the intensity, yeah.
Right. To just being active and going for walks and walking your dog.
Maybe less is more when it comes to health span.
Right. And I think this is not an anti-exercise message as much as it's a pro-health span. And in our health span habits, this is, you'll read in the book in that section on activity, which draws on a lot of this experience Juliana's had as a personal trainer and then the things that we've done in terms of measuring. I think being active becomes way more beneficial.
And that's why, and Kevin, I'm so grateful for your work because I love this. I mean, all of your work, but also that specifically what you just summarized, which I think is perfect, is the Apple Watch. It's the three things. It's stand up, move more, and get some exercise. And that's such a great, healthy message. And I love my watch. I love it. It inspires me so much. I think it's a fantastic device and way to just kind of remind us throughout the day, and it motivates the heck out of me. So I love it.
Yeah. So definitely thank you, Kevin, for joining us. And we have to do this again, but also I think we'll march forward as 2020 presses on. I want to implement a few more public projects that we can all do together. And we'd really love to come visit you there, but also we'd really like to start looking at crowdfunding some projects where we can really demonstrate this and a bigger group of people can participate. And let's just show this in a really common sense, non-controversial way and just be objective, let the data fall where it may. So thank you for joining us.
No, thanks for having me.
Amazing how these 200-plus-year-old ideas are seemingly cutting edge.
Yeah, it was so exciting to have him on.
Yes. Thank you all for joining us on this leafy green path to good health.
It's always the food, so remember,
keep eating right.
Thank you for listening to Science and Saucery. For more details about the content in today's show or to contact Juliana and Ray, please visit us at healthspansolution.com.